When Once Upon a Time premiered in 2011, the hook was simple but clever. What if fairy tale characters were trapped in the real world, stripped of their happy endings and forced to live in small town America with no memory of who they really were? In the middle of this enchanted meets ordinary setup stood Emma Swan, the show's protagonist, the savior, if you will. Now, I need to make something very clear. I was not watching this show back in 2011. I didn't even know it existed. I remember one day I was at a friend's house and he was watching this show. He's looking at the television. He tells me, "Oh, you have to watch this show. It's so good." I'm like, "Oh, what is it about?" He says, "That's Snow White and that's her daughter." I looked at him and I said, "I am not watching this show." I'm not. What do you mean that's her daughter? I'm looking at two adult women, same age. You can tell they're the same age. And you want me to believe or be intrigued or even buy into. I'm like, what is this? I'm not watching this. No, it's good. It's good. I'm not watching this show. I'm not watching it. And so, I was not on the bandwagon in the beginning. It's safe to say that. But I did come around and I ended up loving the show. Now, when did I start watching? I don't know. I know it was years down the line. But back to Emma. Emma wasn't a princess, a queen, or a magical being. She wasn't a witch, a fairy godmother, or a beast waiting to be released from its curse. She was just Emma, at least to her knowledge. A Bellspawn's person with a tough shell, a lonely apartment, and a leather jacket. Unlike Snow White or Prince Charming, Emma wasn't born into a storybook world of destiny and myth. She was abandoned at birth, though she was born in the Enchanted Forest, but you know what I mean. She was shuffled through foster care and forced to fend for herself in a world that wasn't kind to lost kids. By the time we meet her, Emma has this survival instinct. Trust no one too quickly, rely on your gut, and keep your walls high enough so that nobody can hurt you again. It's not the best way to live life, but it's real. And the genius of Emma's role is that she bridged the gap between our world and the fairy tale one in a way that we could all relate to where she was mentally. Because like I said, I'm looking at two grown people on the screen and you're telling me this is her mom. I mean, what? Imagine learning that when you're 28 years old, that your mom is some princess from another realm, and you just have to act like it's normal. Girl, bye. But back to my script because I don't want to get too off. What makes Emma fascinating is the duality of her character. Like I said, on one hand, she's the savior, a title that was bestowed upon her. She did not ask for, and she didn't even believe it. She was predestined to break curses and fight darkness and save lives. On the other hand, she's just a woman trying to figure out how to belong, how to love, and how to stop pushing people away. That tension between the myth and the human being is her arc throughout the entire series. The show could have made Emma a flawless heroine, someone who jumps into her role without hesitation, but instead it gave us a clear character who resisted her destiny at every turn. She doesn't want to believe Henry when he first shows up with this crazy story about Storybrooke, Maine being full of cursed fairy tale characters. She doesn't want to meet her parents, even though deep down inside she's always wanted to meet them and belong. And she certainly does not want to be told she's the savior. Emma's first instinct is always to say no. No to love, no to trust, no to anything outside of herself. And again, it's not selfish, it's just survival. Ironically, that's what makes her so relatable. There's something very universal about her reluctance. She doesn't leap at the chance to save the world because at her core, she doesn't feel like she belongs in it. That abandonment, the one she's carried since she was a baby through a magical wardrobe, is what defines so much of her personality. She's tough because she's had to be. She's skeptical because nobody ever stuck around long enough to prove that they were worth believing in, or that she was even worthy of being loved in that way. She's lonely because deep down, she's convinced she'll never really be chosen. But the irony of Emma's story is that she was chosen. She was chosen before she even had a name, wrapped in a prophecy that she didn't ask for, born into a role she never volunteered to play. Emma isn't written as a perfect feminist symbol or some flawless, strong female character. She's got her own mess. She makes bad decisions. She pushes people away when they get too close. She screws up relationships, runs from feelings, and literally runs whenever she's scared. This is why Emma Swan is such a compelling character to analyze. She represents so many things at once. Ordinary pulled into the extraordinary circumstances, the child who grew up feeling unwanted, the mother who learns to put her son first, the daughter who struggles to forgive her parents, the partner who finally learns to let love in. She's layered in ways that many TV heroines aren't allowed to be, and her story is one of growth, resistance, and eventual acceptance. So, in this analysis, we are going to break down Emma's journey in detail. Now, let me put a disclaimer because I am watching the last few seasons of Once Upon a Time. So, I might not give the full deep dive of her full character because I know y'all were on my head in the Rumple video. Because I didn't talk about his mom and all that stuff. I'm like, those were in the later seasons. I completely just disregard. And I don't even remember it like that. But I am doing my due diligence. So if I don't go into full detail, it's kind of spotty as far as what I remember with Emma and those. Well, she was only in 2 episodes in season 7 or something like that. Anyways, it's spotty as far as storyline for her. So please don't go into all of that this time. Okay, I'm working on it. I'm working on other videos. I just want to give that disclaimer. Okay, back to the story. So in this analysis, we're going to break down Emma's journey in detail. How her abandonment shaped her. Why her emotional walls define so much of her character, how her relationships with Henry, Hook, and her parents, and some of the other characters reveal her biggest struggles, and why the Dark Swan arc was both the best and worst thing the show did for her, in my opinion. We'll look at her strengths, her flaws, and what makes her one of the most memorable modern fairy tale protagonist. When we talk about Emma Swan, everything circles back to one defining truth. She was abandoned. Before she ever became the savior, before she had Henry, before she wielded a sword or learned how to do magic, Emma was just a baby shoved through a wardrobe into a strange land with nothing but a blanket. That act set the tone for her entire life. Abandonment wasn't just an event. It became part of Emma's being. She wore it everywhere she went. And the thing about abandonment is that it doesn't fade. It mutates. It shows up in the way you trust or don't trust, in the way you love or the way you hesitate to love. It lingers in the way you walk through the world, convinced deep down that no one is sticking around. For Emma, that shadow defined her from day one. She grew up without any roots. Emma didn't have the luxury of a family. Instead, she bounced around from foster home to foster home. Every time she thought she might have a shot at stability, it slipped through her fingers. Some foster parents might have been decent, others probably a lot less so, but the constant change meant she never felt safe putting down roots. Why bother attaching to anyone if you know you'll just get shipped off again? This survival mindset shaped Emma's independence. By the time we meet her as an adult, she's practically allergic to relying on people. It's not that she doesn't crave connection, she does, desperately actually, but her childhood conditioned her to believe that connection equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals disappointment. You can see the scars in the little details. Emma's sarcasm, her tendency to brush off personal questions, the way she keeps conversations surface level unless she's absolutely sure she can trust someone. Those aren't random quirks. Those are defense mechanisms. She learned early that the safest way to survive was to rely on herself and only herself. Me, myself, and I's all I got in the end is what I found out. Now, the show doesn't dive too deeply into every specific foster family she had, but the subtext is enough. She was alone, and growing up alone does two things to a person. It makes them resilient and it makes them guarded. Emma's resilience is very obvious. She knows how to take care of herself. She knows how to work, fight, navigate the world. She's resourceful, quick thinking, and tough because she had to be. The toughness, though, is a double-edged sword. It keeps her alive, but it also makes it incredibly hard for her to let anyone in. Emma could have turned out bitter. She could have given up. A lot of kids who grow up without stability don't get the chance to thrive. But Emma, she takes all of that pain and channels it. That shows a grit in her character that sticks with her even when she doesn't know who she is yet. One of the most telling traits of Emma is her inability to believe in happy endings. And really, can we blame her? For most of her life, fairy tales were just that, fairy tales. Happy endings were something other people got. When you've been abandoned as a baby and bounced around foster homes, happily ever after sounds like a cruel joke. This disbelief is why it takes her so long to even entertain the idea that Henry might be right about Storybrooke and the curse. It's not just that she's skeptical of magic, she's skeptical of hope. Hope has never worked out for her. Every time she let herself hope for something better, the rug got pulled out from under her. So by the time she's an adult, Emma's convinced that believing in anything, love, magic, family, is just a setup for disappointment. That's what makes her eventual growth so powerful. She doesn't just have to believe in fairy tales. She has to rewrite her entire worldview. So let's talk about the catalyst to all of this for Emma, and that is meeting Henry. Henry is the first crack in Emma's armor, so to speak. When he shows up at her door claiming to be her son, she doesn't know how to handle it. She's not used to being wanted. In fact, she's used to being disposable. But Henry isn't there to reject her. He's there to pull her into a bigger story, one that reframes her entire life. At first, Emma resists, not because she doesn't care, but because caring is terrifying. You can not no notification. This is supposed to be off. Oh, where was I? Talk about her. Oh, not because she doesn't care, but because caring is terrifying. And you can see it on her face as soon as Henry says, "I'm your son." And first she denies it, and I'm like, maybe the denial is coming from her disassociation. She has put that way in the back of her mind, and it's also attached to another traumatic event in her life, which was being left by her child's father. But when she realizes, wow, wait, I did have a kid 10 years ago, you can see it in her whole energy shift. How scared she is of facing this truth. If she accepts Henry, she's accepting that someone might actually depend on her. That's a massive leap for someone who's only ever depended on herself. But that's also the beauty of Henry's role. He forces Emma to confront the part of herself that still aches to belong. And if you look a little closer, Henry's arrival doesn't just start her journey as the savior. It starts her journey back to being the abandoned child who finally gets to be chosen. Henry chooses her. That choice starts to heal something inside of Emma that has been broken since birth. Another byproduct of Emma's abandonment is her complicated self-image. She walks through the world with this sense of being less than. Even though she's strong and capable, deep down she struggles with feelings of worthlessness. She believes she wasn't good enough for her parents to keep, even though the truth is much more complicated. And this sense of unworthiness shows up in her relationships. She's quick to push people away because she doesn't think she deserves their love or loyalty. It's heartbreaking, but it makes sense. When your first experience in life is being left behind, you internalize that as a reflection of your value. Emma spends a huge part of the series slowly unraveling that belief. Being the savior, reconnecting with her parents, building a life with Henry, all push against that narrative. But it doesn't vanish overnight. It is a work in progress. That is what makes Emma's journey compelling. Even as she grows, those wounds never fully disappear. They're a part of who she is. But here's the irony. The child who was abandoned grows up to be the one who saves everyone else from abandonment, loneliness, broken lives. Emma's whole arc is about breaking the cycle. She's left behind as a baby, so she grows up and she's determined to make sure that doesn't happen to her own child. It's almost poetic. Emma's abandonment, as cruel and messed up as it was, gave her the tools she needed to step into her role as the savior. Without those scars, she wouldn't have the same strength, empathy, or determination. Her pain becomes her power, even though she doesn't realize it at first. Now, let's dive more into this savior word, because if there's one title that defines Emma throughout this series, it's the savior. It's not just a nickname or a throwaway prophecy, it's the backbone of her entire existence. From the very first episode, when she's told she's destined to break the curse, Emma isn't just a character who stumbles into Storybrooke, she's the person everyone is waiting for, even if they can't remember that, or if they knew it to begin with, because some of them wasn't as privy to what was going on, It was all about the in crowd. But that kind of expectation would be overwhelming for anybody. But for Emma, who grew up without family, without guidance, and with a lifetime of disappointment, it's especially heavy. Just think about that for a second. You were abandoned at birth, and you've had this hard life navigating through this world alone. And now you're expected to save the very people who put you in that predicament to begin with. That's a lot. The savior complex in Emma's case is both literal and symbolic. On the surface, she has magical responsibilities that no one else can carry, but underneath that, she also carries the emotional weight of fixing other people's lives, often at the expense of her own happiness. And while the show frames Emma's role as heroic, it also digs into the darker side of being the one who saves. The loneliness that comes with it, the pressure, and the way it reinforces Emma's lifelong belief that she has to do everything alone. When Emma first learns that she's the savior, she doesn't believe it. And honestly, who would? So when she does believe it and she does buy into this whole story and accept it as her fate, Emma quickly realizes that being the savior doesn't stop with one curse. Once she breaks the dark curse, another one rolls in, and then another, and then another. And it's like, how many times do I have to save everyone? She becomes the permanent problem solver for an entire town, which, whether she likes it or not, is a part of her destiny. It's kind of as if her life was never her own. It's always tied to the next crisis. The savior complex isn't just about Emma saving others. It's also about how she uses that role as a shield for herself. Being the savior gives her a sense of purpose, but it also lets her hide from her own emotional pain. Instead of dealing with her childhood scars, her fear of intimacy, or her guilt over giving up Henry for adoption, she throws herself into fixing everyone else's problems. This is classic Emma. She deflects her vulnerability by focusing outward. If she's busy being the hero, no one has to look too closely at the little girl inside who feels unwanted still. Saving the town is easier than admitting she feels unworthy of being saved herself. In a way, the savior role validates her. People need her. People rely on her. And for someone who spent her life feeling unnecessary, that can be addictive. But there's always a cost, dearie. Okay. I don't know why I keep trying to do the rumple, because clearly I'm not him. But it just comes into my head. Anyways, but there's also a cost. The more she leans into the savior, the less she allows herself to just be Emma. Her identity becomes consumed by the job, and that's where the complex really shows itself. Emma doesn't just save people because she can. She starts to believe it's all she's good for. I'd say that one of the smartest things that Once Upon a Time does is treat the savior role as both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it makes Emma powerful and gives her purpose. On the other hand, it robs her of the normalcy. She doesn't get the luxury of a quiet, ordinary life. Even when she wants to just be with Henry as his mom or have a simple relationship, there's always another battle waiting for her. The Dark Swan storyline really highlights this idea. When Emma takes on the darkness, it's partly because she believes she has to. No one else can. She absorbs the burden in order to protect others. That's the savior complex in its purest form. Sacrificing yourself to the point of losing yourself. It shows how Emma's need to save people can slip over into something self-destructive. And I mean, the savior title doesn't come with an end date, so Emma doesn't get to retire from being the savior. It's not like she can hand in her resignation and live in peace. The job defines her until the very end. Now, with all the savior talk that goes on in this show, it is worth noting that Emma isn't the only hero in the show, but her heroism is different. Snow White and Prince Charming are brave, but they are more traditional fairy tale heroes. Regina becomes a hero, but it's part of her redemption arc. Emma, however, was never raised to believe in fairy tales. She doesn't step into the role with optimism or faith. She steps in reluctantly with skepticism and with a lot of emotional baggage. So that makes her victories a little bit more sweet. It's not like her belief all this time, all her life, was good triumphs over evil. She had to learn to believe step by step in herself and in the possibility of something greater. So now let's talk about one of the most weird aspects of the show, at least to Blush in the early days. Emma Swan's relationship with her parents is one of the strangest and most emotionally complicated arcs in Once Upon a Time. Most TV heroes don't have to deal with the bizarre paradox of meeting their parents as adults, but for Emma, this is her reality. She grows up believing she's unwanted, only to discover later that she is, in fact, the cherished daughter of two fairy tale icons. Snow White and Prince Charming didn't abandon her because they didn't want her. They abandoned her because it was the only way to save her. And that's a heavy truth for anyone to process. And Emma spends much of the series caught between the rational understanding of why it happened and the emotional ache of what she lost. When Emma first learns who her parents are, the situation is bizarre for everyone involved. Snow White and Prince Charming look like they could be her friends. But instead of being tucked into bed by a loving mom and dad, Emma is standing in Storybrooke sharing coffee with them and knowing about their extramarital affairs, all while trying to wrap her mind around the fact that they're technically her family. This creates a tension that lasts throughout the series. Emma doesn't naturally fall into the role of daughter. She can't. The years are gone, the milestones are missed, and her trust is fractured. Instead of building their bond through childhood memories, bedtime stories, and scraped knee moments, their relationship has to begin from scratch, but with the emotional baggage of an entire lifetime already weighing on Emma's shoulders. At the root of Emma's daughter arc is her struggle to forgive. Intellectually, she knows her parents made the sacrifice to save her, but emotionally, she still feels like, why would you do that? That's actually what I wrote on here. It's not something that goes away just because the truth comes out. Abandonment trauma leaves scars, and even though Snow and Charming explain the magical wardrobe and the curse, Emma still has to live with the fact that she grew up alone and believing she wasn't wanted. Emma's resentment surfaces in subtle ways. She often keeps her parents at arm's length, calling them by their first names instead of mom and dad. It's her way of signaling the distance between them, a wall she isn't sure she's ready to break down. For Emma, trust is something earned, not automatically granted by blood. And while her parents are eager to shower her with love, Emma needs time, space, and proof that this relationship won't crumble like so many others have in her life. But Once Upon a Time doesn't let Emma's resentment harden into cruelty. The show consistently gives her moments of softening, small cracks in her armor. As the series goes on, Emma begins to understand that her parents' choice weren't rooted in rejection, but desperation and hope. Forgiveness doesn't come instantly, but it does come slowly and unevenly, until Emma starts to call them mom and dad with genuine affection. Emma's relationship with Snow in particular is layered with longing. Snow represents both who Emma wishes she had as a child and who she actually gets in adulthood. In one breath, Snow is the fairy tale ideal, loving, warm, endlessly supportive. But in another, she's just a woman, flawed, guilty, and often struggling with her own choices. For Emma, this duality is both comforting and frustrating. She finally has the mother she always dreamed of, but she's meeting her way too late in life. That sense of lost time haunts Emma's interactions with Snow. She sometimes pulls away as if protecting herself from the pain of imagining her life and what it could have been if she'd grown up with Snow by her side. At the same time, she craves that closeness, and their scenes often carry a tenderness that shows Emma's deep, if complicated, love for her mom. One of the most moving aspects of their dynamic is how Snow refuses to give up on Emma. Even when Emma keeps her at a distance, Snow continues to show up, to support her, to remind her that she is loved. For someone like Emma, who has spent her life bracing for people to leave, this kind of consistency is healing, and even if she doesn't want to admit it right away. I'd say that Emma's relationship with Charming is a little different. With Snow, there's the complicated intimacy of mother-daughter bonds, but with charming, Emma often feels like she's navigating unfamiliar territory. She never had a father figure growing up, so the idea of suddenly having one is both foreign and welcomed. One of the defining features of their relationship is Charming's pride in Emma. For someone who has spent most of her life doubting herself, this unconditional pride is transformative. It allows Emma to see herself through his eyes, not just as the abandoned child, but as the savior, the leader, and the hero she was meant to be. Emma's journey as a daughter isn't about replacing the years she lost. It's about learning that family can still be built in the present. The past will always sting, but her relationship with Snow and Charming becomes proof that love isn't bound to a timeline. Even though they missed out on birthdays, graduations, and tucking her in at night, they can still create new memories, fight battles together, and lean on each other. And perhaps most importantly, Emma's bond with her parents helps her to soften toward the idea of family in general. Their presence makes her less guarded with Henry, more open to love with Hook, and more willing to trust others. By experiencing unconditional love from her parents, Emma begins to heal the wounds that shaped her childhood. So let's dive more into Emma as a mother. When we first meet Emma, she doesn't even see herself as mother material. She's a Bellspon's person, living on her own, keeping her guard up, convinced she doesn't need anyone. The word family feels like a foreign language to her. Then Henry shows up at her door. This kid who's full of hope, imagination, and stubborn determination. He claims she's his mom and the key to breaking a curse. Naturally, Emma thinks he's a little crazy. But this moment is the real beginning of her journey into motherhood, whether she realizes it or not. At first, Emma keeps her distance. She gave Henry up for adoption when he was born, and she spent years telling herself it was the right thing to do, even possibly bearing the idea that it happened in the first place. Deep down, though, she carries a huge amount of guilt. When Henry finds her, she's caught between wanting to know him and feeling like she doesn't have the right to. What makes it worse is that Regina, the evil queen, but also Henry's adoptive mom, has raised him since birth. To Emma, it feels like she's intruding. Her initial attempts at motherhood are clumsy. She doesn't know how to set boundaries. She doesn't know how to comfort Henry the way a seasoned parent might. And she often defaults to protecting herself by keeping things casual. But Henry won't let her off the hook. He doesn't want Emma to be his mom. He needs her to be his mom. That persistence starts breaking down her walls. Now, if you want to take this story and strip it down even further, if you strip away magic and curses and enchanted forests, and we focus just on Henry and Emma, this show is about one thing. A kid who wants his mom to believe in him, and a mom who learns how to believe in herself through him. Henry isn't just Emma's entry point into Storybrooke. He's her moral compass. Without Henry, Emma wouldn't have stuck around. She wouldn't have accepted her role as the savior. In a very real sense, Emma becomes a hero because she becomes a mom first. And I think that's what makes this relationship so powerful, because it's not just like a side plot. It's the emotional grounds for the entire series. Henry's faith in her is unshakable, even when Emma doubts herself. He pushes her to see her worth, and in turn, she learns how to give him the kind of love and protection she never had. She loves Henry almost instantly, but she doesn't know how to show it in ways that the average person will understand. She's so used to being tough and guarded that softness feels dangerous to her. Motherhood forces her to practice vulnerability every single day. And the great thing about Henry is that he's already knowing this process. One, he has this book that he learns about his family, but he also can relate to his mother, Emma, in ways that she doesn't quite understand. He knows what it feels like to be given up so that he can have his best chance, just like her parents gave her up so that she could have her best chance. When Henry is in danger, which happens quite often, Emma's protective instincts kick in full force. She's ready to go to war for him, whether that means standing up to Regina, facing down magic she doesn't quite understand, or literally traveling to other realms. These moments show us a different side of Emma, not just the fighter, but the nurturer. Of course, motherhood isn't simple in Storybrooke. Emma's relationship with Henry is always tangled up with Regina, who loves him just as fiercely. The tension between Emma and Regina isn't just about curses and power, it's about motherhood. Both women are terrified of losing Henry, and both women believe they're what's best for him. What's beautiful though is how Emma and Regina eventually grow into co-parents. It's kind of interesting and weird, but that's the relationship. They start from a place of deep rivalry, but over time they learn to share Henry, not just fight over him. This does not come easy, and it challenges Emma to think about motherhood in less black and white terms. Without Henry, Emma's life would have stayed small. Lonely apartment, walls up, never letting anyone in. With Henry, her life becomes bigger, scarier, but also infinitely more meaningful. Henry forces Emma to confront all the things she's afraid of. And in return, Emma gives Henry the kind of unconditional love she never had as a child. She breaks the cycle, being present for him even when she doesn't feel ready. That's a huge victory, and it's one of the most emotional storylines in the series. And I think one of the reasons why Emma's motherhood resonates so strongly is because it's not perfect. She's not magically good at being a mom just because Henry is her son. And that's what makes it real. Parenthood is messy, and Emma shows us it takes courage to show up even when you feel like you're failing. Her journey also speaks to the experience of mothers who didn't raise their kids from birth, whether through adoption, foster care, or just estrangement. Emma has to navigate that late start, the awkwardness, the guilt, the pressure to catch up. Watching her push through those struggles and still build a strong bond with Henry is one of the most moving parts of her story. Now, when we talk about romantic relationships, they've always been kind of a touchy subject for Miss Emma Swan. From the very start, it's clear that love is something she struggles with. And honestly, it makes sense. When you're given up at birth, tossed through the foster system, and taught that the only person you can really rely on is yourself, letting someone else in feels impossible. And while that makes her strong in some ways, it's also clear that intimacy doesn't come naturally. Part of Emma's growth over the series is learning how to let her guard down, how to love, and how to be loved in return. Watching her stumble, fight, and eventually accept partnership is another aspect of her story that most of us can relate to. Emma's first big romance we hear about in the show is with Neil Cassidy, Henry's father. Neil is both a love interest and a turning point in her life because her relationship with him leaves her with very deep scars. At first, Neil is someone who gets her. He understands her rough edges. He understands her distrust of authority and her survival instincts. With him, she feels seen, maybe for the first time. But then comes the betrayal. Neil lets her take the fall for a crime, and Emma ends up in jail. It's a moment that defines how she thinks about love for years afterwards. If you open yourself up, you'll get hurt. If you trust someone, they'll leave you behind. This wound doesn't heal easily. By the time the show begins, Emma is wary of romantic involvement altogether. She doesn't date. She doesn't lean on anyone. She doesn't look for love for sure. Her whole focus is work and keeping her emotional world lockdown. In many ways, Neil sets the standard for expectations of relationships, fleeting, dangerous, and bound to end badly. The central romance in Emma's story is, of course, with Killian Jones, aka Captain Hook. Their relationship is a slow burn, and honestly, that's part of what makes it compelling. At first, Emma and Hook are constantly at odds. He's flirtatious and cocky, shamelessly persistent. She's guarded, annoyed, and not remotely interested in this pirate thing, or at least she pretends she's not interested. What makes their dynamic interesting is the way Hook refuses to give up, but not in a toxic, pushy way. He challenges her, but he also respects her choices. Little by little, he proves that he's not just a selfish pirate. He's someone who can commit, someone who can put her needs first. This is something Emma is not used to. Every step of the way, she tests him, and every time he passes. Their relationship is messy at times, of course. Hook has a dark past, and Emma has a hard time fully trusting him. But that's what makes their romance feel real. They argue, they misstep, they hurt each other, but they also grow together. Hook helps Emma see that being a partner doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean losing yourself. It means having someone who always has your back. A big theme in Emma's romantic journey is her fear of loss. She knows what it's like to lose people, her parents, Neil, stability, family. So even when she starts to fall for Hook, there's always this voice in her head warning her that it won't last. She struggles with the idea of happily ever after because her whole life has been the opposite. This fear really comes to the surface when Hook is in danger. Time and again, Emma is faced with the possibility of losing him, and it shakes her to the core. These moments force her to admit how deeply she cares, even if it's terrifying. Choosing love for Emma is always an act of bravery. It's not easy or simple. It's a conscious choice to risk her heart despite her fear. One of the most beautiful parts of Emma's journey as a partner is watching her gradually learn how to let love in. With Hook, she doesn't just get a romance. She gets a partnership. He's someone she can laugh with, argue with, and lean on when things get hard. He sees her not as the savior, not as a hero or a mother, but as Emma. And that's something she's desperately in need of. Through this relationship, Emma learns that vulnerability doesn't equal weakness. Letting someone in doesn't mean giving up her independence. It means allowing herself to be supported. She learns that love doesn't have to hurt the way it did with Neil. It doesn't have to end in betrayal or abandonment. Love can be healing, love can be safe, love can be worth the risk. While Hook is the standout romantic partner in Emma's life, it's also worth noting that the idea of partnership extends beyond just romance. Emma slowly learns how to partner with her parents, how to trust her friends, and how to fight as part of a team. For someone who's been alone most of her life, these connections are just as important as her romance. Her growth as a partner isn't just about finding true love. It's about accepting that she doesn't have to face the world by herself anymore. Now, let's touch on the love-hate part of Emma's character. The Dark Swan arc. Taking the show's lead character, the savior, the hero, the person meant to keep the darkness at bay, and flipping her into the very thing she's been fighting against was a pretty ballsy move. It's the kind of narrative choice that could have completely flopped if it wasn't grounded in Emma Swan's character. But instead of feeling random or just for shock value, the Dark Swan arc felt like the culmination of all the struggles Emma had been carrying since episode 1. At its heart, the Dark Swan storyline wasn't about power or the utmost magic. It was about temptation, trauma, and control. It forced Emma to look at her greatest fear, that deep down she wasn't as good as people believed she was. that maybe she wasn't really the savior because she wanted to be. Maybe she was just playing a role she was pushed into. Emma's slide into darkness didn't happen overnight. For years, the show had been planting the seeds. We'd see her wrestle with her past, her skepticism of being the chosen one, and her instinct to run when things were too hard emotionally. By the time she took on the darkness, the ground was already there. Because we have to remember, Emma never asked to be the savior. That label was thrust upon her before she could even walk or knew that she had fingers. She spent her whole life not knowing who she really was, and when she finally discovered her role, it was overwhelming. Saving Storybrooke, fighting curses, taking on villains, it all came with this huge weight of responsibility. And while sacrificing her own happiness for others, stepping into danger and taking the emotional hits so other people could live. And while Emma rose to the challenge, the truth is she never got much of a choice. She was constantly sacrificing her own happiness for others, stepping into danger and taking the emotional hits so other people could live their fairy tale endings. So when the darkness presented itself, it was offering her something she had secretly longed for: relief. Relief from being the only one whose job was to save the day. Relief from having to put everyone first. Relief from the endless burden of being perfect. One of the most interesting things about Emma as the Dark Swan is she didn't become like this cartoon version of evil. Her version of darkness was very subtle. She became cold, detached, calculating. She used manipulation where she used to use honesty. She leaned on secrecy instead of trust. Her relationships, especially with her parents and Hook, started to fracture because she wasn't letting them in. She was holding everything close to her chest, convinced that she alone knew the right path forward. She spent years being open to pain and being vulnerable enough to love Henry and to love Hook and to love her parents, despite their flaws. But that was draining, and the darkness allowed a way for her to not have to do that anymore, to protect herself. Emma at this time was not suddenly rewritten into a villain. She was Emma Swan, pushed to her breaking point, finally wondering what it would be like to stop hurting, to stop being afraid. But it, of course, came at a price. With Henry, he's always been her anchor, the person who gave her purpose. But as the Dark Swan, she started to pull away from him. She justified it by saying she was protecting him, but Henry didn't need protection. He needed his mom. Watching Emma keep him at arm's length was kind of heartbreaking to see, because it highlighted how the darkness was warping her instincts. The Emma we knew fought tooth and nail for Henry. The Dark Swan pushed him away. With her parents, their relationship had always been complicated, but darkness made it worse. Emma already had deep wounds from their decision to send her away as a baby. Becoming the Dark Swan turned that unresolved hurt into walls of mistrust. So she stopped listening to them, stopped confiding in them, and for once, they weren't her safe place. They were outsiders. With Hook, I think that was perhaps the most central relationship in the Dark Swan arc. Hook was the one who had always believed in Emma's goodness, the one who understood her darkness and still chose to stand by her. But the darkness put strain on their bond. Emma didn't want him to see her as weak or vulnerable, so she kept secrets from him. And eventually, the most devastating moment came when Hook himself was consumed by darkness, creating this twisted mirror image of their love story. For Emma, that was the ultimate breaking point, realizing that her choices had pulled him down with her. The real struggle of the Dark Swan wasn't about Emma wanting to be evil. It was about Emma wanting to have control, in that it's a similar arc with Rumple, but we've already talked about him, so we're not gonna go back down there. Go watch that video if you haven't. But for most of her life, she felt powerless. As a child, shuffled again through the foster system. As a young woman, constantly on the run. As a savior, trying to stop forces bigger than herself that she doesn't even quite understand. Darkness gave her the illusion of control. She thought if she just held tight enough, if she kept her secrets close, if she carried everything on her own shoulders, then no one could hurt her. But the truth was the opposite. The more she clung to control, the more she lost the very thing she wanted to protect. Her relationships, her trust, her identity. The savior wasn't meant to fight alone. She was meant to lean on her loved ones. That realization is what ultimately pulled her back from the darkness. And what makes this Dark Swan arc so fascinating is that it doesn't just tell us about Emma. It tells us about humanity. So many of us carry the weight of expectations, of responsibilities, of wounds we never really dealt with. And when things get hard, the temptation to shut down, to wall ourselves off, to stop being vulnerable feels almost irresistible. It feels like the best choice. Emma's darkness wasn't about destruction. It was about numbness, and that's what made it so believable. It showed us that sometimes the scariest thing isn't turning into a monster. It's losing touch with the parts of yourself that made you human. And I know that sounds like the same thing, just reversed, but think about it. We all have darkness within us. We all have the good and the bad. Sometimes that switch to the dark side of us comes on, but when you lose parts of who you are at the core, that's when you should be worried. That's when it's hard to turn back. It takes a lot to come back from that. Now, did this Dark Swan arc work for the show? It was not the perfect execution. Some fans felt like the pacing dragged. Others thought the show didn't fully commit to showing Emma's darker instincts. It kept it pretty surface level. But regardless of flaws, the arc gave us one of the richest layers of Emma's character. We saw her tested in ways that went beyond the sword fights and the magic. We saw her at war with herself, with her fears, with her desires, her exhaustion. And in the end, we saw her choose herself. The Dark Swan arc was about her realizing that she could never truly be herself if she shut out the people who mattered most. And that's for the Dark Swan as well as the Savior. And that's the legacy of the Dark Swan. It's a reminder that even in our weakest, darkest moments, it's not too late to reach back and go towards the light. Okay, we have reached the intermission of this video, mainly because I don't remember anything past the Dark Swan. like I said, I'm trying to watch, and it's kind of leaving me even in watching it back, because I'm watching other stuff, and then just trying to keep up with everything is like, yeah, this is why it didn't resonate with me the first time around, and it's not resonating now, but I'm trying. But we're gonna pause on the Emma story. If there's more to her story that I think adds to her, then I will add it to another video. But I feel like that pretty much sums up who she is in a nutshell, right? I guess now, I don't know how long this video is going to be. So, two things. I'm going to ask you for your opinion on Emma as a person. What aspect of her did you find most compelling? Was it her being abandoned and exploring those emotions? Was it her love stories? Was it her relationship with Henry? Was it her parental relationship with her parents? The Dark Swan? Was it her relationship with Regina? What part of her did you think stood out the most? And how, if at all, did you relate to her as a character? I'm curious to know. Because I feel like a lot of her characteristics are pretty universal, you know. And just to let you guys know, like, I want to save room on my like recap video. I don't know if I'm gonna do the recaps or if I'll do actual reviews, but that's when I'll get into more of like my opinion about certain things. I just wanted to give like a overview of, you know, the character analysis, but I'll go deeper into different things that I saw during the show when I do my reviews, just to let you know. The second thing, so pause the video if you can and answer those questions for me, because I really do want to know your opinion. And then after you unpause it, pause it first, write it down, type it in. If you're still listening to this and you haven't paused it yet, I swear, pause the video. No, okay. After you unpause it, I just want to see if you're still here. So if you are still here, comment leather jacket. That is one of Emma's staples, of course, throughout the series, along with her yellow bug. I feel like those are a part of her armor. They protect her. They are a comfort to her, almost like a blanket. And it's her suiting up to go into any situation. She grabs her jacket, she jumps into her car. Is very much a part of her character. They're characters of their own, really. But okay, after you unpause it, comment leather jacket so that I know you're still here. Or you can comment, you know, within what I just asked you to do, but I'd rather you do it separately so that I know that you're still here. Now, I think I can do the lovely couple that anchors the show, and that is Snow White and Prince Charming. So, let's dive into that. All right. So, when talking about Once Upon a Time, it's almost impossible to skip over the story of Charming and Snow White. They are the heart of the series, kind of. They're the kind of couple that seems to define what it means to love and sacrifice, grow together over time. But what's fascinating is that the show doesn't present them as perfect characters living a flawless fairy tale. Instead, it gives us a nuanced look at who they are individually and how they came together as a couple, blending classic archetypes with deeply human qualities. You see, at first glance, Charming seems like the perfect prince you'd expect from a Storybrooke. Brave, honorable, kind, fine. Snow White, in turn, is often seen as the sweet, compassionate princess whose goodness is almost legendary, at least in the very early years of Snow White. But Once Upon a Time quickly shows that there's so much beneath the surface. Charming and Snow are both tested by villains, by fate, by their own personal fears and insecurities. What's compelling is how these challenges shape them both as individuals and as a couple. The series uses a clever narrative technique of dual identities for all the characters, their fairy tale selves in the Enchanted Forest and their modern counterparts in Storybrooke. This duality adds depth because we see both the idealized hero and princesses alongside their human, sometimes flawed counterparts. Charming becomes David Nolan, the devoted but sometimes hesitant father and husband. Snow becomes Mary Margaret Blanchard, a woman who struggles to reconcile her idealism with the messy realities of life. Very much head in the clouds, full of hope. By exploring both versions, the show gives viewers a chance to see not just what makes them good people, but what makes them relatable. The couple's journey is as much about their individual growth as it is about their love story. Each has strengths and weaknesses that both complement and challenge the other. Together, they form a partnership that is tested through curses, betrayals, separations, and parenting challenges. But time and time again, they find their way back to each other, proving that their love isn't just romantic, it's resilient, enduring, the unwavering motto throughout the series. I'll find you. I will always find you. In addition to being the central romantic couple, Charming and Snow also serve as moral anchors for other characters. Their courage, integrity, and willingness to fight influences everyone around them, from their daughter Emma to friends and even former enemies like Regina. Watching them navigate adversity gives the show its emotional weight and shows that heroism comes in many forms. Not just swords and magic, but patience, understanding, and emotional courage. This part of the analysis will explore them first individually, then together, and dive deeper into their personal growth, moral challenges, and relationships. Before he was Prince Charming, David was just a shepherd. He and his mother Ruth lived humbly, raising sheep, scraping by, and surviving through hard work. Like how we all do. Unlike his twin brother James, who was sold to King George as a baby and raised in wealth, David grew up with the values of patience and grit and empathy. This upbringing shaped his personality. His sense of fairness and compassion comes directly from his mom, who instilled in him the importance of kindness and responsibility. You can tell he learns early that being a good man isn't about status, but about how you conduct yourself, choices. But as fate would have it, David did not remain a shepherd forever. When his brother James dies, King George forces David into a role of prince, essentially asking him to live as his twin. This is where his lifelong imposter syndrome begins. Suddenly he's wearing crowns and fighting dragons, but inside he still feels like the shepherd boy who doesn't belong. The tension between who he is and who he's expected to be runs through his entire arc. On the surface, David looks like the perfect fairy tale prince, brave, moral, and selfless. And at a large degree, he really is. He fights for others, he leads, he refuses to back down from injustice. But in this show, we see the insecurities. He often doubts himself, wonder if he deserves the role he's been given, and sometimes he makes mistakes out of his insecurity. His courage is real, but you can see it's forged within the moments where he chooses to be heroic despite his fear of not being enough. David's greatest challenge is internal. That constant tug of war between the shepherd he was and the prince he was forced to be. Living in his brother's shadow, he often feels like he's pretending, not comfortable with politics or being royal, and he knows that King George sees him as a pawn and not a son from the very beginning. But to me, the imposter syndrome makes his victories that more meaningful, because he has to earn every bout of respect, not only from others, but from himself. He has to learn to be okay to be in this space where it's kind of like an outer body experience. And then there's Snow White. His love for her changes everything. With Snow, David doesn't have to pretend. She sees the shepherd and the prince, and she loves both of them. Their relationship forces him to grow, not just as a hero, but as a partner. He learns to balance his protective instincts with respect for her independence. In Storybrooke, as David Nolan, he faces even more layers of conflict. He has false memories, split identities, and moral dilemmas that push him to question who he really is. This fractured sense of self really puts a spotlight on the nucleus of his journey. Charming is always searching for balance between his roles, his identities, and expectations. His inner conflicts make him relatable. He worries about failing Snow, about being a good father to Emma and later Neil, about leading when he still feels like the boy on the sheep farm. But through it all, he shows resilience. He doesn't run from it. He steps into it and does his best, even when he's terrified. That is what makes him charming. Not being perfect, but persevering. Now, Snow White, or Mary Margaret Blanchard in Storybrooke, is often portrayed as the heart and moral compass of the show. While Charming represents courage and protection, Snow embodies compassion, empathy, emotional resistance, as well as courage and protection. She is one of the most enduring characters in this series because her strength isn't flashy or she doesn't have magic. It comes from her principles and her ability to inspire hope in others, even in the darkest of circumstances. Her origin story in the Enchanted Forest is familiar, but rich in detail and nuance. Born into royalty, she's thrust into danger from a very early age, particularly because of the evil queen's jealousy. Unlike other fairy tale princesses who might have passively waited for a rescue, Snow is proactive. She learns early to navigate in the most dire of circumstances. She believes in the inherent goodness of people and consistently seeks to do the right thing. This optimism drives her to help others and take risks that might seem dangerous or foolish to someone less compassionate. At the same time, she is practical enough to act strategically when needed. For example, when she's facing magical threats or planning to outwit her villains. I believe her combination of idealism and realism makes her a believable character. Compassion is central to Snow White's character. She has an uncanny ability to understand people and empathize with their struggles. This allows her to connect deeply with those around her, whether they are allies or strangers or even former enemies. Characters like Regina, who began as her adversary, are influenced by Snow's patience and kindness and unwavering belief in redemption. This doesn't mean Snow is naive. She's very aware of the danger and betrayal that comes with this life, but her optimism is grounded in experience and moral conviction rather than blind faith. But also, Snow often struggles with balancing her desire to be good with the need to protect herself and her loved ones. The show frequently places her in situations where there's no clear right answer, and that puts her in situations where most times her values, they're consistent under pressure, and further establishes her as the central moral character in the show. Relationships play a crucial role in Snow's growth and her character development. Her bond with Charming is central. Not only is he a romantic partner, but a source of mutual support and understanding. Their love is defined by challenges, separations, and shared sacrifices. all of which test and strengthen their connection. Snow is also characterized by her determination. One of Snow's most compelling qualities, after determination, is her ability to balance being vulnerable with her strength. She experiences fear and doubt, sorrow, but she doesn't let those emotions define her. Instead, she acknowledges them, learns from them, and uses them to inform her decisions. When we think about Once Upon a Time, there are a handful of core images that come to mind. Emma in her leather jacket, Rumpelstiltskin in his voice, Regina with her sharp glare. But when you think about Snow and Charming, for me at least, the first thing that comes to mind is, I'll find you. I'll always find you. Unlike many traditional fairy tale couples, Snow and Charming are given layers of conflict, growth, and complexity. They aren't perfect. They don't fit the happily ever after narrative. They're flawed, determined, stubborn, and they constantly have to choose one another, fight for one another, and grow together. Their relationship is both about love and survival. The show positions Charming and Snow as the ultimate true love couple, complete with, of course, a magical kiss that literally breaks curses. But if you strip away the fantasy element, what's left is the foundation of why their love really works: mutual respect, equal partnership, and relentless devotion. From the moment they meet, Snow robbing Charming's carriage and him chasing her down, there's a spark that feels different from the typical prince saves damsel dynamic. Snow is clever, resourceful, and independent. Charming is noble and kind-hearted. Instead of one rescuing the other, they meet as equals who challenge one another. Their banter and disagreements quickly evolve into trust and admiration. This is essential for them because Snow isn't defined by Charming and Charming isn't defined by Snow. Instead, they bring out the best in each other. Snow helps Charming lighten up and take risk and look at the world with a little more hope and heart. Charming helps Snow to see the value in herself when she feels down, gives her stability, and focuses on the realistic aspects of life. If Snow and Charming's story was just a series of love at first sight moments and gumdropping rainbows, it wouldn't be as compelling, especially not for this show. What makes it work is that the relationship is constantly being tested by curses, villains, distance, misunderstandings, even death itself. Even when reunited in Storybrooke, life isn't perfect. They struggle with parenting Emma, who resents them for sending her off as a baby, which, yeah. They deal with Regina and her schemes, Rumpelstiltskin and his manipulations, and the reality that no curse is ever truly gone. Through all of this, Snow and Charming disagree, they clash, and sometimes even fail each other, but they always find their way back. And this paints the realistic picture of a couple. This takes you out of the fairy tale land because every couple has fights, every couple has obstacles, but to keep choosing each other is what makes the love so enduring. But let's get into one of the most interesting arcs of both Snow and Charming, which is their parenting. Now, when it comes to fairy tales, parents usually fall into one of two categories. They're either absent or there's some type of tragedy. And when I say absent, I mean they're just not in the picture at all. And usually it's one parent, which is interesting as well. But in this story, Snow White and Prince Charming are unique because they get to be both fairy tale legends and very real parents. Their parenting story stretches across two timelines, first with Emma and then later with Neil. And it's filled with hard choices, heartbreak, and moments of growth. Snow and Charming are not defined only by the love story that brought Emma into the world, but also by the impossible decision to send her away. In the pilot episode, it sets all of this up. In order to save their daughter from Regina's curse and essentially everybody else, they place her into a wardrobe, hoping that one day she will return to break it. It's the kind of sacrifice you expect in a fairy tale, but what the show does so well is explore the consequences of that act. Snow and Charming grow up without their child, and Emma grows up without her parents. Both sides carry wounds from this separation. When they finally reunite, things don't magically fall into place. Emma resents being abandoned, and she still has this survival instinct. And Snow and Charming feel guilty for all the years they lost. This creates an emotional, awkward, and sometimes painful dynamic where they try to navigate their roles as parents to an adult that they don't fully know and who doesn't fully trust them or need them all the time. And the show doesn't shy away from this awkward stage. They show how messy it can be. It is trial and error, and it requires a lot of patience and a lot of forgiveness. Once Emma becomes a part of their lives again, we see Snow and Charming shift into more of active parent roles. This is after the curse is broken, of course. They try to offer guidance, emotional support. Charming constantly pushes Emma to believe in herself and to see her potential as the savior. Snow focuses more on nurturing Emma's emotional side and encouraging her to open up and accept the love that they want to give. And this shows that parenting never truly ends. We think about it as kids, you need your mom, you need your dad, but really, you always need your parents, no matter what age you are. Snow and Charming step into that space for Emma, even when she resisted. And over time, they rebuild the trust. Watching them become a family is a very satisfying part of the show. Later on, when Snow and Charming have baby Neil, we get a glimpse of them raising him the traditional way, being present in his life. But even then, the show doesn't make it simple. They're in constant danger in Storybrooke. Their duties as leaders often overshadow them, being parents. And they have complicated family ties. People try to come in and take their son away from them. And you see that struggle of being present and loving in the way that they need to, as well as comparing or having even flashbacks of how it was when they lost Emma and not wanting that to repeat itself. One of the recurring themes for Snow and Charming as parents is sacrifice. Sending Emma away was the ultimate sacrifice, but it's hardly the only one. They keep putting themselves in danger for the sake of their children. They endure curses and life-threatening battles because their kids' survival always comes first. But what makes it compelling is that the sacrifices are not portrayed as easy or without cost. Snow wrestles with the guilt over the curse, blaming herself for the suffering it caused. Charming struggles with the frustration of being unable to protect his family fully, no matter how hard he tries. At the same time, their sacrifices are what define their legacy. Emma inherits their courage, their determination, and their capacity for love. When you think about the way she gave Henry up for a better life, the way she fights for other people, the way she learns to love throughout the series, even when she's afraid to, all of that comes from her parents. I'm sure Neil, though he was very young, but he's going to inherit those same traits. This sense of generational resilience is key to why this aspect of the show resonates. I would say one of the strongest aspects of Snow and Charming's parenting is how united they are. They don't always agree on methods, but they share the same core values: the love and sacrifice and doing what's right. This partnership sets the tone for their family. Emma, who's spent much of her life alone, gets to see what a stable, loving partnership looks like through her parents. Charming often takes the role of the motivator, pushing Emma to embrace her destiny and believe in her strength. Snow, on the other hand, of course, provides the emotional grounding. And together they balance each other out, offering Emma both toughness and tenderness. Their roles as parents, or actually I should say their roles as leaders, spill over into their parenting because they didn't have Emma around when she was younger. They adapted certain traits early on. As rulers, they provided guidance and made sacrifices and shouldered responsibilities that affected everyone around them. If you think about the way Charming encouraged the Dwarves, or Snow and how she comforted Red or Henry, they consistently act as stabilizing forces for the larger family of Storybrooke. In many ways, their approach to leadership mirrors their parenting. But it is important to note that Snow and Charming aren't flawless parents. They make mistakes, they misjudge situations, and at times their optimism blinds them to Emma's struggles. Emma often pushes back against their relentless hope, and sometimes she has a point. They can be idealistic to the point of frustration at times. But these flaws don't erase their love or commitment. In fact, it makes them more real. Sometimes parents just overdo it, or they don't know the boundaries, or they don't pay attention to what their kids need in the moment. Parenting is about trial and error, about learning as you go, and Snow and Charming show that throughout the series. When Emma finally calls them mom and dad, it feels earned because the journey to get to that space is very messy, and there's so many obstacles they overcome to get to that point. Now I want to get into some of the relationships outside of the family. And of course, I have to start with Snow White and the Evil Queen, aka Regina Mills. This is one of the most fascinating stories because it's not just good versus evil, though the show certainly plays with that dynamic. It's a story of betrayal, grief, jealousy, revenge, and every once in a while, the possibility of redemption. At the center of all of this is tension between two women who in many ways mirror each other. Both are strong, both are deeply emotional, and both are defined by the choices they've made in response to love and loss. Snow White begins as the innocent princess who accidentally ruins Regina's chance at happiness. Regina, meanwhile, becomes the vengeful queen whose hatred of Snow consumes her entire life. That might sound simple on paper, but the show adds layers to their relationship that makes it more tragic and at times even sympathetic. To really understand them, we have to look at how the rivalry started and how it shaped both of their lives. And let's touch on why it continued to matter long after the curses were broken. So the origins of this rift. The feud between Snow and Regina starts with an innocent mistake, which makes it all the more heartbreaking. Regina was a young woman. She fell in love with a stable boy named Daniel. He represented freedom for her, the possibility of living a life outside of her mother's suffocating control. Regina was ready to give up any type of royal possibilities or wealth to run away with him, and that's something that tells us a lot about who she was before she became the evil queen. Regina was not born evil. She was made to be. But then little Snow White entered the picture. At that point, Regina wasn't Snow's enemy. She was more of like a big sister figure. I wouldn't even say mom. Snow admired her and looked up to her. Regina even saved Snow's life when she was a child, which is a complete contradiction to everything that happened after that. That act of bravery to save her life connected the two, and Snow felt like she could trust Regina completely.
Unfortunately, when Regina confided in Snow about her love for Daniel, Snow made the very fatal mistake of telling Cora, thinking she was helping. This is where everything takes a turn. Snow's betrayal, though unintentional, led to Daniel's death at Cora's hands. Regina's heartbreak hardened into rage, and her feelings towards Snow twisted from affection to pure hatred. From that moment forward, Regina saw Snow as, not as a child, but someone who made a mistake and destroyed her happiness. One small choice spiraled into a feud that spanned decades, kingdoms, and even realms. For Regina, hating Snow became her entire identity. She built her reign as the evil queen around it. Every spell, every plot, every act of destruction circled back to her desire to make Snow suffer. The dark curse she cast on the enchanted forest wasn't just about gaining power in some different world, but to make sure that Snow never saw her happy endings. Snow, meanwhile, carried a massive burden of guilt. Even though she was just a child at the time, she blamed herself for Regina's loss and for the darkness that followed. That guilt shaped her actions as an adult. Snow grew into someone who was not only compassionate and kind, but also determined to take responsibility for her mistakes. She always wanted to be better, be a better person, maybe in part to atone for what happened. This is what makes their relationship so rich, because it's not just hero versus villain. It's woman who feels responsible for ruining another's life versus woman who can't let go of her pain. Both of them are trapped in a cycle. Snow trying to make up for something she can't undo, and Regina refusing to forgive something that happened decades earlier. In the Enchanted Forest, Snow and Regina represent opposite sides of a moral spectrum. Snow was the beacon of hope, the one who rallied people against tyranny. Regina was the ruler who let her grief turn into cruelty. But even here, the lines weren't always clean. Snow sometimes had to make hard choices that weren't purely good, and Regina sometimes showed flashes of the woman she could have been without Cora's influence. Their feud wasn't just personal, it was political. Regina's vendetta against Snow rippled outward, affecting entire kingdoms. People died, villages burned, and families were torn apart because of one person's bitterness. What's striking is that both women were defined by love, just in different ways. Snow was defined by her ability to give love, to believe in it even when things looked like there was no chance. Regina defined by the loss of love and by the anger that came from not being able to reclaim it. That is the difference that put them on the opposite sides of history. When the Dark Curse transported everyone to Storybrooke, their feud didn't just disappear, it took on a new form. Snow became Mary Margaret, a school teacher living a modest life, while Regina became Mayor... I think I got PTSD. Okay, let's say it slow. Regina became Mayor Mills. Oh God. Oh goodness. Okay. All right. And of course, that was her trade for being queen. I can't even finish. If you're watching this video, you have no idea why I'm laughing. Go watch the Regina video I did. Good Lord. Okay. Everybody else, please, just don't bring attention to it. Okay. All right. Where was I? Okay. Their dynamic shifted, but the tension was always there. Mary Margaret tried to live quietly, but Regina's bitterness lingered in this new world. At one point, Regina framed Mary Margaret for murder, showing just how far her hatred still reached. And yet, as the series went on, we started to see something different in the hostility. The two women are forced into situations where they had to work together, especially when their children were involved. Henry's presence in particular forces them to to a truce, since both cared deeply for him. This is where the show really played into the idea of redemption. Snow believed in giving people second chances, even people who hurt her the most. Regina, for all of her resistance, started to respond to the belief slowly, unevenly, but genuinely. Their Storybrooke relationship showed that forgiveness was possible, even if it wasn't easy. One of the most compelling aspects of their relationship is that it was never linear. It didn't go from hate to forgive, and that was that. Instead, it moved in cycles. Sometimes they worked together as allies, sometimes they fell back into their old patterns of mistrust. Each time, though, the edges softened just a little bit. Snow never stopped being cautious around Regina, but she also never stopped hoping that Regina could change. Regina never completely let go of her anger, but she also began to see Snow as more than just the girl who betrayed her. Later on in the series, their relationship had grown into something closer to mutual respect, even with the baggage of their past. Together, they embody one of the show's central themes, that people are not defined solely by their mistakes or by their pain, but by the choices they make moving forward. Snow chose hope, and Regina chose, eventually, redemption. Now let's get on to one of the relationships that I think is often overshadowed, which is interesting given the context of the origins of the story. And that is Snow White and her relationship with the 7 dwarves. It's a very underrated aspect of her character arc. While most of the spotlight, of course, shines on her relationship with Charming, her rivalry with Regina, and her blooming relationship with Emma, her friendship with the dwarves gives us a different angle on who Snow really is. In the Enchanted Forest, the dwarves aren't just comic relief or background characters. They become her found family when she's on the run from the evil queen. Think about it. Snow had lost almost everything. Her father, her kingdom, her safety, her sense of belonging. And in that wilderness of grief and survival, the dwarfs became her companions. They didn't start off completely trusting her, and she didn't immediately fit in with their dynamic, but over time they became loyal to her, and she became very protective of them. The most important connection among them all, of course, is with Grumpy. She's patient with him, willing to look past all of his rough edges, and in return, he softens, at least at times, around her. Grumpy often acts like a grumpy older brother, calling her out when she's being too idealistic, but also standing by her in battles and in dangerous moments. The dwarves also represent something that she desperately needs, and that's community. Unlike Charming, who is thrusted into a position of leadership and power responsibility, Snow is exiled and hunted for most of her young adult life. She had to scrape together a new life, and the dwarves provided that. Without that chosen family, Snow's path might have been much darker, perhaps more bitter and solitary. In Storybrooke, the dynamic shifts, but it doesn't disappear. The dwarves, now living as townsfolk with blurred memories, still gravitate towards Snow, for Mary Margaret, even without remembering their full history. Once the curse begins to break and memories resurface, that loyalty comes back in and is strengthened. They continue to see her as someone worth following and protecting, even when the outcome is unsure. Snow's relationships with the dwarves also highlights her humility. Despite being royal at birth, she never treats them as subjects that are beneath her. She treats them as equals, as friends, as her family. She doesn't command loyalty through fear or her title. She earns it through kindness and just being a genuine person. In the bigger picture, the dwarves serve as a symbol of Snow's ability to build family outside of her bloodline. Her story isn't just about the prince who loved her or the daughter who saved her. It also highlights the small everyday friendships that gave her strength along the way. And that takes me to another underrated relationship in this show, and that is Snow White and Red Riding Hood. In the Enchanted Forest, Snow and Red meet under difficult circumstances. Snow is on the run while Red is struggling with her own secret, even though she doesn't fully know what's going on with her. You know, that she's a wolf that terrorizes her entire village every full moon. Despite their individual struggles, the two women find solace in each other. Red gives Snow a safe place to stay, a companion who doesn't judge, and in return, Snow offers Red acceptance. This is important because Red has spent much of her life hiding who she really was, and to be accepted fully without conditions is a healing moment for her. Their relationship works so well because it's built on honesty and vulnerability. Snow doesn't treat Red like a monster when she learns the truth. Instead, she shows compassion, insisting that Red's wolf side doesn't define her, and she's not afraid. Red realizes that Snow sees her, the real her, not just the dangerous part that she's been taught to fear. It's a thing that carries through many of the relationships in the show. Acceptance of someone's dark side is often the key to love, whether romantic or platonic. And then on the flip side, Red is very loyal to Snow. When Snow is grieving or doubting herself, Red is often the one to remind her of her strength. She's not afraid to push Snow to fight back against Regina or to keep going when odds feel impossible. Where Charming gives Snow romantic support, Red gives her that sisterhood. In Storybrooke, their dynamic of course shifts, but it still remains just as important. Ruby is a young woman trying to figure out her identity in this small town. She works at Granny's Diner, wears interesting clothes, and struggles with direction in her life. Mary Margaret is one of the first people to treat Ruby with kindness. The value of their friendship also comes through when the town turns against Snow during the Catherine disappearance arc. Ruby is one of the few people who still believes in her, or at least at the very least refuses to abandon her along with Emma. That unwavering loyalty shows that Red's connection to Snow isn't just situational, it's a deep-rooted connection. In a world where women are often pitted against each other, especially in fairy tales where stepmothers and queens compete with their younger counterparts, Snow and Red's relationship is a breath of fresh air. They don't compete, they lift each other up. And in doing so, they create one of the most genuine, believable friendships in the series. Which is why I was like, why are we not getting more Red towards the end of the series? But you know, whatever. But I want to touch on something that was very tricky in this show, particularly in the first season, and that is Charming, or David, and his wife Catherine. On paper it looks perfectly normal, their marriage between two adults in a small town, but underneath the truth is more complicated. Catherine is of course Abigail, the daughter of King Midas in the Enchanted Forest, and their marriage is a result of manipulation, curses, and duty rather than actual love. This relationship forces Charming into one of his most difficult moral struggles, and that's balancing obligation against true love. In Storybrooke, David and Catherine appear like a couple struggling to reconnect. David wakes up from his coma thanks to Snow, Mary Margaret, reading to him, and suddenly he's faced with a woman who insists that she's his wife. He doesn't feel that bond though. His memories are fractured because of the curse, and when he meets Mary Margaret, there's that instant pull that he can't quite explain. Catherine, meanwhile, is left playing the role of a woman trying to hold up her marriage, while her husband drifts emotionally further away every day. It's painful to watch because Catherine isn't the villain. She's just a person caught in the crossfire of a magical curse and two people destined to find each other. What makes the relationship so interesting is how it exposes Charming's flaws. In the Enchanted Forest, he's noble and brave and almost unwavering, but in Storybrooke, with his memories scrambled and his sense of self diluted, we see him waver. He tries to honor his marriage with Catherine at first, even attempting to reignite something with her, even though he doesn't quite know what that is. But his heart keeps betraying him, pulling him toward Mary Margaret. That conflict shows that Charming isn't a perfect fairy tale counterpart. He makes mistakes, he lies, he drags Catherine along in his confusion longer than he should. In short, David is messy and human and flawed, which makes him more fascinating to witness. Catherine herself deserves recognition as well. She isn't just some placeholder wife. She genuinely cares for David and tries to help him adjust after his coma. When she senses his distance, she doesn't lash out. She tries to repair things. She even encourages him to be honest with himself. In other words, she has dignity and complexity, even if the show doesn't give her much of a spotlight. And her heartbreak in this complicated relationship makes the audience kind of root even harder for Snow and Charming, because the cost of their love is someone else's pain. And so just to relieve her of that, you want them to be together even more in a way. In the Enchanted Forest, Charming's marriage to Abigail is even more clearly tied to obligation. It's arranged as a part of an alliance, linking Charming to King Midas's wealth and power. Neither Charming nor Abigail really want it, but both feel bound by duty. Abigail, to her credit, eventually lets him go and even helps him on his journey to reunite with Snow. This generosity softens her character and redeems her from being seen as just an obstacle. Her presence in both worlds serve as a test of Charming's heart. Will he choose the path of least resistance and fulfill his duty, or will he fight for true love? The Catherine Abigail storyline adds depth to Charming because it reminds us that love isn't always clean or simple. He's torn between what's expected of him and what his heart tells him. And while we know he'll always choose Snow, the detour through Catherine reveals that even the Prince Charming archetype can stumble, hurt people, and learn from his mistakes. Without Catherine, his relationship with Snow might not feel as tested or as hard-earned. Now, I have to touch on the relationship that started all of this, really. At least brought the families back together and broke the curse. Mary Margaret and Henry. From the beginning, Mary Margaret is naturally drawn to Henry. Even before she knows he's her grandson, she treats him with kindness and patience, encouraging his imagination instead of shutting it down. When everyone else thinks Henry is being strange or obsessive with fairy tales, Mary Margaret takes the time to listen. That matters because Henry's whole journey starts from a place of not being believed. Snow validates him in small, everyday ways, and those moments build trust between them. What's especially touching is how Snow values even the smallest moments with Henry. You'll often see her smiling at him, celebrating his victories, or just being present in his life. Those scenes may not seem flashy, but they carry a lot of emotional weight. The reminder of this story not being just about fairy tales, but about true family. Their relationship also underscores the theme of belief that runs through the show. Snow has always been a believer, someone who clings to hope, and even when everything seems lost. Henry, the truest believer, reflects the same quality. Together they mirror each other. Snow as the older generation who kept the faith through hardship, and Henry as the younger generation carrying that belief into the future. Looking at Snow and Charming's story from start to finish, or at least start to season 5, it's clear that they're not just romantic leads. Of course, their love creates Emma, who becomes the savior. Their hope inspires Henry, who becomes the truest believer. Their compassion redeems Regina. Their leadership rallies the Dwarves, Red, and the entire town. And their persistence proves again and again that no curse is too strong to break. It's very much giving Marvin Gaye and what's her name? Is it Tammy? Now I gotta look it up. Ugh. Yeah, Tammy Terrell. Ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from you. In the show, Once Upon a Time makes you realize that their importance goes beyond their individual arcs. Snow and Charming are the story. They're the reason it begins, the glue that holds it together, and the thing that keeps it going, whether it's directly or through their lineage. Alright, so that is all for this video. I want to say thank you to everyone who watched the entire thing. If you made it to this point in the video, then write the word apple in the comments. That way I know that you made it through Snow's story and Charming and everybody else. I want to give a shout out to the executive producers of this video, as well as our other patrons over on Patreon. Shoot, it's about to start raining. Back to this video. I do not have time for no rain. Like I said, I will get into the specifics of the show once I do the review. This is more of an overview of their characters, their character arcs, and how their actions have influenced who they are as people. But I would like to know from you guys, what aspects of the Charmings do you relate to the most? Is it their parenting style? Is it the way that they choose to treat people around them? One of the things that I admire most with Snow in particular is her willingness to, again, see the goodness in all people, even in the times that with Regina, where she's like, you know, very cautious of who she is and moving with intention to not be hurt or put herself or anyone else in danger with Regina, but she still always has this glimmer of faith that Regina can be better. You know, she has her moments of being like, okay, no, I was wrong about you, but then she goes back to, you know what, I see the goodness in you. And it's like, that's a strength that I don't think is talked about enough with people. Like, really seeing the good and acting on the good that you see in people. That's just me personally. But what aspect do you admire most about them, and what relationship in the show did you gravitate towards the most? Like I said, Snow with the dwarves, David with his wife Catherine, Snow and Red, Snow and Regina, Charming and Henry, even though I didn't talk about it in this video. But you know, which relationship did you kind of gravitate towards? Let me know down below. Okay, this video is going to be very long. I have a lot of editing to do. Like I said, please follow me on Instagram if you guys want to know when I upload. What else? That's all. I'm going to get off of here because I have a lot of editing to do. But always remember that I'm all ears. Until next time. Bye.